So, imagine you're on a plane. You're flying, and you're a manager, a successful one actually, and you're concerned. You believe that Agile is the way to go. The company supports you, the team supports you. Actually, you have 4 teams, not 1. But for one particular team, it doesn't work somehow. All the 4 teams, actually, all the company have went through Agile Boot Camp a year ago, but now you see that product owner is somewhat unhappy, team is somewhat unhappy, something is just not right. The plane lands and you have a decision. What the heck? It's an Agile problem, right? So if it's an Agile problem, let's hire Agile Coach for 6 weeks and see what he can find. So, hello everyone. I'm happy to be that Agile Coach who took the challenge and embarked on 6 weeks journey. So, in this case study, this is actually going to be a case study. I'm not going to tell everything what has happened during those. I'm actually going to focus on 4 weeks, first 4 weeks. But I will highlight the main events and I'll guide you through why these events happened in a sequence the way they did. So I know that all these things happened because I was writing a diary every day just to make sure I have reflections written down and I can later on check them, check my assumptions and see how well are we progressing. So the context. The product is basically a Serium. It is one of a couple of installations in the SAP Global Services. It has been developed for 2 years. The team, it's somewhat around 12 people, somewhat because it depends on whom do you consider to be inside the team, whom do you consider to be outside the team. But basically, the business part of the team was in Stockholm, you may say, and the development part of the team was in Vilnius. The process, Scrum. So it's standard Scrum, nothing special. I mean, the good part though that all the roles were in place. Scrum Master there, Product Owner there. So yeah, looks like regular Scrum. The iterations were 1 month and they managed the backlog in TFS. Okay? So from the helicopter view, it really looks nice. I mean, everyone went through a boot camp a year ago and it was led by international coaches. It was a good thing. So all the roles in place, ceremonies in place, you know, everything looks quite okay. And then the logical question is why to hire an Agile coach at all? So, as I mentioned before, it didn't feel quite agile. There were some frustrations and this product, the push from the business was quite high. We needed to deliver it as soon as possible. Additional thing is that, the manager definitely couldn't jump fully on that team. He had too much on his plate. So it was only 1 team of 4 that he led. And he expected that Agile Coach would bring an unbiased view on the situation, first of all, and maybe some good practices from his previous experience. So the journey. When you actually start with a new team, this is something I really propose to consider. You need to start with the end in mind. And in case of Agile Coach, well, the end is usually the change. We have something as of today, we will work somehow different tomorrow. And if we are lucky, we have an engine that will continue to change over the entire life of the team. So, how do you feel when you say something like, you're here to change something? I bet that you can sense resistance immediately. And resistance is definitely not something you want to end up with. So you don't want to end up with games where people just not willing to do whatever you're proposing. The good point though about the resistance is that usually it's just an intelligent reaction to some stupid ideas without understanding the context. So what actually I've started with is one-on-one with pretty much everyone. Okay? So with people, slow is fast. I spent enough time to listen to people, to understand what are their problems, and also to answer questions. They don't know you. You need to be introduced, right? So we visualized our talks a lot. So we were not just talking, we were drawing, actually drawing a lot. This is a typical picture. So after a meeting, like hour to hour and a half meeting, the board would look like that. But I must state that this really allowed us to nail down the key points and avoid running in circles. You know, the discussion where you, oh, I already told you that, so but let me tell you again, just to make sure that you didn't forget. No, we nailed down it, we continue. And I found out actually that they know a lot about Agile. That boot camp, it was great. So, and that was maybe a basic finding, but very important one. Just imagine if I would start with basic Scrum Guide or whatever workshop which introduces the basics of Agile. That would be awful, right? And they would be like, come on, dude, what are you doing? So I'm really happy that that was avoided. So I didn't start with the simple questions. I then started immediately with more challenging ones. And challenging the constraints is the basic principle of improvement in Agile. In this case, we started with the sprint length workshop. This is basically a workshop that I do one way or the other with pretty much every team. So we asked, okay, our sprint is 1 month. What prevents us from having 2-week sprints? And the goal here is not to solve something. The goal is to bring up that context, to bring up all the gritty-nitty issues that people see in doing so. Shortening the sprint length means shortening the feedback loop. And that is vital in Agile. But if there are constraints for doing so, you'd better know them up front. And you know, managerial constraints usually can be fixed quite quickly. But if you have a huge legacy system, mainframe, and you propose, for instance, to have a deployment every week, maybe every day, why not? Good luck. That might not work. Okay? So I wanted to find out, okay, do we have any real constraints? And you can see that we had plenty of items there. Most of them, good though, were easily fixable, but a couple of items, actually 2 items, were not that easy to fix. There was a security model and there was a manual deployment to production. We fixed the second one, the first one, not that easy. So the second thing you want to do is to visualize your workflow. So how do you work? And here we had this second workshop. We split into a couple of teams. I wanted really to avoid a single person taking the lead and proposing all the answers. I really wanted to find out what's going on. And we started to draw on a board. So let's take an item and how does it go from idea to actually being delivered to production? All the stages, through all the roles, right? You want to understand when the analysis is performed, when the technical analysis is performed, development, testing, what are the artifacts they create, who is doing what. I am less interested in who is responsible for what. I'm more interested at actual state, so who is doing what. And then mapping all of that on the board. So where are the ceremonies? What are the outputs of those ceremonies? Do we have a backlog update after refinement? So all these real answers. And it's very important to focus on what's happening and not how they would like things to happen. These are different things. After the workshop, the two groups presented the results to each other. We discussed. Nothing was changed. The findings, well, the way of work actually was quite standard one. So it's nothing fancy, idea, analysis to the idea, refinement, development, and so on. But the challenges that they faced were somewhat standard as well. Basically, the definition of done, so what does it mean to go to refinement, was not that much explicit. And sometimes they mixed push and pull. So as a consequence, for instance, ideas from chief product owner were floating to business analysts, regardless of what is the capacity of business analysis people. The next thing that you want to do is bring all that on the board. I am a big proponent and a fan of physical boards. I think that they are very easy to create and very easy to change by everyone. They are somewhat harder to maintain, but when you want to enter the team and see what's going on, that is not an issue. Maintenance, you don't consider that for a while. So we started to draw. And draw some more. And finally, we had a board that satisfied our needs. So we had all the process on the board, and we agreed on coloring codes. So with that, we ran through the simulation with a couple of items, and it looked like reasonable. So it reflected the way the people work. We immediately fixed a couple of places where there was obvious pull and push principle violation. There was no objectives, so as there was no objective, we just fixed that. Next thing, well, you have the board. Now you need to map the state. And I believe that this workshop was one of the most important ones. So we started to discuss, okay, so what does it exactly mean to place an item here in the refinement? What does it mean to item to be in the refinement? Should it have a user story? Should it have mockups? Should it have been reviewed by developers before? What does it mean that we are happy with the refined item and can move it forward? Should it have an estimate? Should it have a definition if it's a proof of concept, and so on? And that was very revealing because people actually started to express their expectations towards each other. So business analysts finally started to express their expectations to product owners, developers, to business analysts, and so on. Do keep in mind that this one can be really lengthy, but I think that all the time that we spent there was worthy. At the very end, as you can see, we had basically a definition for each and every column, and we then can move on to the next step. And that is actually mapping the state. So we went literally through every item in the product backlog and tried to apply those definitions that we just agreed on. And here is where you stand your ground. It was okay to push half-baked item to development yesterday, but we have just agreed that it's not okay anymore. So we agreed that there's supposed to be acceptance criteria, and this item, well, sorry, it doesn't have acceptance criteria, so it's not ready. And it's really challenging. People don't feel comfortable, but at the very end, it was late evening, 7 o'clock. I realized that it's 7 o'clock, and I asked, oh, maybe we should continue the next day. And they said, no. It's less than an hour left. Let's finish this. We want to see it. And the results was quite interesting. We obviously realized that, okay, take a look at the analysis in progress. And there is only one person working there. Something is obviously not right. Take a look at those steps here. That means that we have external dependency on external vendors, and it's stuck. Okay? So the things, they started to, be visual, radiate. The next step, maybe we're ready for changing anything. Well, my answer would be hold your horses. Before you change anything, mind the business. Okay, so you have your process, you have your state. That's awesome, that's great, but where are you going? What are the main users? What is the expected timeline? Without these questions answered, your improvements, if you may, might be way off the chart. Maybe you'll start improve technical things, but the delivery is expected to be like tomorrow. Well, not tomorrow, in a month. Or the delivery is expected in 3 years. It's obvious that you need to invest in some automation. It's a long journey. And actually, it was revealing again. In mind of the business, and that was what the development team had, we are building a cockpit where everything is visible, and easy changeable. Well, you know that this is not enough. This is not enough for development team, okay? So we started the story mapping. It's really standard story mapping. Sorry, I don't have the image of our story map, but it looked pretty much exactly like that. So we had themes, we had big epics, and we had user stories assigned. We actually prioritized all of that according to business value. We added business value numbers to each epic, and we prioritized accordingly, the most important on the left, least important on the right. And yeah, that was what are we building. Then we had a main user workshop. So I think that the results look pretty much simple, right? And I'm really glad they do look simple, because we started with having 30 different user types. As you can see, we ended up with 4. So what we did, we actually segmented the users and then started to speak. Okay, we have actually 4 main user segments. How do they behave in the system? What are the screens that they are going to, and where they don't go? And we very quickly realized that actually almost all of the users are using only 7 screens, well, mainly 7 screens, in somewhat a little bit different order. And there is only one user type which is something different and not using like a lot of those screens, right? Now, the beauty of these 2 last workshops, that when you combine them, they tell a much better story. For instance, we very easily identified, okay, so if we take a look at our long-term roadmap, it's obvious that it has impact on 1 and 2, on 2 screens. Oh, sorry, not like that. So, of all the 7 screens, the most impacted ones were only 2. Now this is a much more defined vision, long-term vision for development. We now have what we are doing, we now have a little bit of what it impacts. Now we can talk. And actually that created a solid base for improvement. Now you can start your agile progress, if you may. And by saying that, I mean that the framework was clear, the Scrum. The state was clear, the board, bottlenecks, the queues on the board, and the goal, the story map. All of that visual information actually fitted to a single 2-sided whiteboard. And it was aligned with everyone. Everyone could understand it. So product owners, managers, developers, QA, everyone. And that is great. That is the essence of making decisions fast. And in this case, it was clear. Okay, so we need to pay more attention to extender vendors, as mentioned. We need to establish second-level support. We realized that there were a lot of disturbances here. We need to fix provisioning pipeline. This is not good. We need to hire another development, because if you take a look at long term, it doesn't fit. We're too slow. We need to maintain transparency. Everyone was happy with what they see. They wanted to maintain that transparency. But of course, we needed to adopt online tools. You cannot have forever a physical board when you have 2 or 3 locations. So, you know, when it's clear what to do, you just do it. So start with end in mind, challenge the constraints, visualize way of work, map state, never forget the business. I've done this mistake a couple of times. Don't do it. Never forget the business. And then act. So, and what about the manager that was on a plane? Well, now he felt less like being a passenger on a plane and more like a pilot, with the Agile Coach being his co-pilot. So thank you. Fly safe. We got you covered.
Okay, thank you, Danil.